And I looked at that olive tree and I was experiencing longing in many different areas of my life and kind of dreaming about what this book would become. And I thought, man, is that not us in our waiting, right? Like, we would love to just escape chill hours altogether. We would love to just say, like, Lord, I want the fruit in my life. I want the thing that I'm longing for, but not at the expense of me having to wait, not at the expense of it feeling like a winter season. But so many times, I would argue every time in my life I've had to wait or I've had to long for something and trust in God and rely on Him fully, it has actually been the thing that has molded and crafted and shaped me and readied me for whatever God had next.
You're listening to the Big Ideas Podcast with Ashlee Ilg. Tune in for honest conversations as we pursue bold dreams, redefine what is possible, and empower the next generation to live big. You'll hear stories that prove over and over again that just because something wasn't a part of our plan doesn't mean it won't be used for our good. Whether you're already an entrepreneur, you dream of becoming one, or you're raising the next generation of entrepreneurs, this podcast is for you. There's no time to waste on your big ideas. So let's get started. Here's your host, Ashlee Ilg.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Big Ideas Podcast. We are just having so much fun with this season of just interviewing amazing women and entrepreneurs just pursuing where God is leading, especially in the times where we have no idea where He's leading. And the unknown is kind of where we keep finding just so much richness and so many parts of the story, that we just couldn't see on our own. And so I'm so excited to have Rebecca George with us today. She is a 2-time author at this point. Anyway, I'm sure there's more to come. She released her first book, Do the Thing, a couple of years ago. And she literally a week, well, I guess when this comes out, it'll be 2 weeks since you released your second book, You're Not Too Late, which for those of you watching, I have here. You're definitely going to want to order it if you have not already. It is so full and so good. And so it is my honor to have you here at this time as you're launching your book and just getting the word out. We're going to dig really deep into some amazing topics that you've just brought to life. And so without further ado, welcome to the show, Rebecca.
Oh, Ashlee, I'm so happy to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So, I love, I was going to read, the part in the book where it's like, this book is for the hopefuls, but I would love for you to just kind of riff on that of like how this book came to life. Where were you at? I just love always the backstories of like how God lays this message on your heart. So just kind of tell us like how this book came about, why it was so impressed on you. Who is this book for?
Yeah. I actually love that you pulled that statement, Ashlee, because that is something that I would come back to almost every time I would sit down to write. God gave me that sentence really early on. So I'll probably miss a phrase, but it says, this is for the hopefuls, the almost but not yet, the crushed in defeat, the stunned by a lack of progress, and the weary woman ready to hang up her jersey. And it was interesting, Ashlee, because as I started dreaming about this book, originally I thought maybe it was a book on singleness. I was in my later 20s when I got married. I'd been a bridesmaid 12 times, had planned all the baby showers, like had navigated my own desire and longing to be married while also seeing it come to pass and my friends taking that next step in their life, it seemed, while I was just standing still. I dealt with that tension for a good number of years. And so I felt a lot to say about that. But as I started just really examining my own story and then talking to other women in my life, I began to realize this area of longing didn't just end for me the day I walked down the aisle and married my husband. Because as soon as God provided in that way, this new longing popped up in my heart, whether it was, career related or the desire to have kids, anything that causes our hearts to just long for something we don't have yet. And so I kept kind of asking the Lord to reveal to me, like, what comes up in me in this area of waiting and longing, and how have I struggled in that? And then how do I feel like that kind of universally applies to all of our waiting and
Yeah.
longing? And that's kind of what the book became, Ashlee, is like, what are the most common challenges? And then how do we answer that with a biblical perspective? Like, I believe we can experience his joy in the midst of our despair, in the midst of our valley, but it's not about us getting the thing we want. It's about us experiencing his presence, right? So that's one of 10 examples, but that's a little bit of the journey of kind of how I got there. I love that question.
Well, it's so good. And it's interesting you bring that up too, because as I started reading it, I was like, well, I'm not single. I wasn't single for a long time. My husband and I met in college. So we got married, not young, but we were, 20, we had just turned both 24 years old. And, but as I kept reading, I'm like, oh, this book is for me. There's other parts that, like you said, they still resonate because there are longings. And if, which, kind of leads me into the next point of, well, I love how you broke every chapter up into, the segments of like what the world says versus what God says. And so like every chapter, like you said, that tension, like, oh, I'm feeling the tension between what the world says it kind of looks like and maybe should look like, or really a lie. And then just kind of flipping that over and being like, but what God's word says. And so, you're the one of the first chapters, idolatry versus surrender. And, there was this part that I am going to read because it just I read it over and over again. It was so just refreshing and like life-giving. You said, we don't need stronger arms to pick things up and proudly hold them up before Jesus's gaze. So we ensure he sees exactly how we hope he works next. We need a posture of humility to lay things down at his feet. Our fingers will ache at times from the tight grip we held, but there is such freedom and renewed joy on the other side of the release. And I was like, and all the, overachiever, hold on tight controller, recovering controllers are like, oh, like, oh. And so I would love for you to just kind of talk about, the risks of living in like what you were, talking about, like those if onlys, if only I were married, if only I were whatever, and that's where I found myself in your book, where I was like, oh yeah, they keep coming if we don't lay them at Jesus's feet, so talk us through that.
Yeah, I would love to. Well, I'll first start with like, what is idolatry, right? Because sometimes you might like read that chapter title and think like, ooh, that feels scary. In our current culture, we're not like worshiping golden calves, right? Like idolatry is actually much more insidious in our culture today as Western Christians than ever before, I believe. And so many times what will begin as a good desire, the desire to be married, guess what? That's God-given. The desire to grow a family, to grow in your career, to pursue that with excellence. All of those things are God-given gifts and blessings in our lives. So it's our view of that sometimes needs to be right-sized, right? Like I define idolatry in the book as anything in action or attitude that elevates something to a place of prominence meant for God alone, right? So that can look like a lot of different things. But what tends to happen is we begin to say, as you beautifully said a moment ago, if I only took that next step in my business, if I only had the time to get involved in that organization, if I only got pregnant, if I only met the guy, then I would be happy. And it's such an insidious lie of the enemy for us to believe. And honestly, Ashlee, I believe it is one of our greatest distractions because when something is elevated to that place and it becomes an idol, like let's just call it what it is, it distorts and distracts our view of what God is doing in our lives. And I know for me, and I'm sure a lot of listeners will relate to this, there have been seasons in my life where I desired that thing. I'll just stick with the marriage example for so long that I missed how God was at work around me. And I look back now and think like, man, that was a really sweet season of community. That was a really sweet season of some opportunities God gave me to serve. And I was faithful to many of those. And I can look back and see his hand now, but I feel like I missed it in the moment. Like I had freedom that I don't have now in this new season of life. And so it's just interesting to step back and consider and search our hearts of like, what are the things I'm answering that statement with? Like, if I only had had blank, I would be happy. And kind of honestly just surrendering those to God and placing our full dependence on him, which is where it should be anyways, as we move forward, even when we don't know how he's writing the story. So
yeah, so good. Hey friend, I wanted to take a quick pause to ask if you've taken the quiz yet to find out what type of dreamer are you. It's super important to discover what's working for you, but also some things that may be keeping you from really pursuing your greatest purpose. It takes just 2 minutes to find out if you're the skimboarder, the sunbather, the sandcastle builder, or the surfer babe. So jump over to dreamerquiz.com and be sure to share your results and tag me in it. Now back to the show. I love that. And it was convicting in like the best way of, oh, I am holding some things too tight.
Yeah.
And it was just, very freeing way to just reshape the way, we treat the things that are gifts that that cliche that we see going around, the life you live now is the answered prayers, I'm not saying it right, but, and so, just trusting that he's got it all figured out, and we don't have to wait to experience his fullness. Yeah.
Yes. I love that.
Yeah.
So good.
So I'd love for you to talk about your Camp for Creatives. Personally, I'm very interested in them myself, but I love that you do them. And I love how you talked, in the chapter in jealousy and gratitude, like those, tensions. But you talked about that opening night kind of speech or welcoming message to your guests that you had. And just, I think it's so important as women, as, Christ followers who are all just pursuing our own unique path, just that the challenge and the maybe the tendency, if we're not careful, to compare paths, and really what that leads to and how we kind of navigate that. But I'd love for you to share like what that conversation, what that opening night was, and how that whole camp kind of progressed because of how you set that whole stage.
Totally. I would love to. Well, to set the stage for that, I many years ago would go to like podcasting conferences, writing conferences, and they were valuable. They were good.
Yeah.
Content was great. But what I found for me personally is that I would somehow throughout the day, make a few new friends, and everybody had to go grab dinner somewhere. And so we would gather and pick a place. And then I found myself at a Mexican restaurant in Dallas a few years ago with this group of friends I'd met at a podcasting conference. We sat there till like 11:30 that night talking just about the challenges of business and our book projects and all the things going on. And I left that restaurant that night and I thought, like, this is really why I came. Like, the content was valuable. I'm grateful for the event. And I didn't realize that this is what my heart longed for. And so at the time, I was in a really isolating season. My husband and I lived in a very small town in South Mississippi of like 12,000 people. It was during the pandemic. I mean, just so isolating. And so my heart just longed for community in my work. And so I just started dreaming about that with the Lord. Like, what would it look like to gather women and create in a maybe different way what I sensed and felt at that Mexican restaurant? And so years later, God moved us back to East Tennessee, which is, surprise, the perfect place to host a retreat because we're right outside of the Smoky Mountains.
Yes.
And so a couple years ago, I started Camp for Creatives. And that is, you described it well, Ashlee. My heart for it is just to gather like-minded women in an environment that has really a zero tolerance policy for comparison, competition, et cetera. I think a lot of well-meaning events have kind of the strategy of like, we serve the newbie or we serve somebody who's been in the industry a while. And there's not a lot of like cross-pollination. My heart was really to create something where if you are a Christian creative woman who writes, speaks, is using her gifts for the glory of God, like, our door is open and you're welcome. Yeah. And that was really the heart that I shared at the beginning of that first night of the very first camp that we ever did. And I remember as the ladies were packing up and we were closing out on the last day, the very first time, one of the attendees came up to me and she said, for the first time at an industry thing or like I'm gathering with my peers, I feel like I was able to take my Spanx off. Yeah. And I'll never forget her saying that.
Because that's such a feeling.
It was so significant to me because I thought like that is it. She's a mom, she's a creative, she's wearing a million hats and like just needed a space that was safe that
Yeah.
she could process what God was doing. And yeah, I'm just grateful for the community God has built in that. It's been so beautiful. So yeah, what we do looks a lot different than a lot of quote unquote conferences.
Yeah.
It's a lot of just downtime and rest and worship and masterminding. And there's an agenda like
Mhm.
on paper, and there's just a lot of room for the Holy Spirit to work and
Yeah.
for God to just work as we get away. I think we don't spend enough time,
Mhm.
especially as women, just getting away and truly resting with people who do what we do.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
been so fun.
Well, and you kind of referenced the isolation part, but the other side to that of like you called cross-pollination, which is such a great visual of, where it could be easy to be like, oh, well, I want what she's got, or I want to be where she's at, like
Mhm.
now. And as a business owner, as a, rookie writer right now, I'm like, you can see where, or people would, it's just very easy to say like, oh, well, I want to be where they're at, but you're like, you actually don't, because the experience that I think you call it your winter chill, right? Or
Yeah.
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 Talk about that, because
I would
we
love to.
don't want we don't want other people's stories,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so many times that is also such a lie of like we
Mm,
intersect with somebody's story at a time when maybe they had a breakout book or they, you know, had some success and what we didn't see was the decade that they were waiting
right.
for that. Right. So like I'll also start there. But yeah, the term chill hours was so significant to me in writing this book. My husband and I went to Israel the year that we got married, which I'll never forget. It
Yeah.
like totally changed the way I read scripture. And I'm so grateful that we got to go when we did. But there was this theme throughout the trip of olive trees. They were everywhere we went. When we went to Bethlehem, we went to one of the shops where they carve these beautiful statues that you can purchase. And we went to Jerusalem and the Garden of Gethsemane. They're just everywhere.
Yeah.
And I saw my green thumb husband kind of turning his wheels, and I could tell he was kind of doing his research, and he was trying to find, is there a species of olive tree that will grow in our climate where we were living at the time in Mississippi, which is a very hot, humid climate in the deep south.
Yeah.
And he found this species called an arbequina. And as he was researching the arbequina, he discovered this term chill hours, which basically means every species of olive tree has to withstand a certain number of hours below a certain temperature in the winter in order to produce fruit. If it has too many hours below that temperature, it won't produce fruit. And if it doesn't have enough, it also won't.
Mm.
And so he ordered a couple of, we called them baby olive trees, that had been sort of pre-grown to 5 or 6 feet. We planted one in the backyard. It leafed out over the couple of years that followed. And I vividly remember, and I write about this in the book, a day I was sitting on our back porch, just looking out over our backyard, and I looked at that olive tree, and I was experiencing longing in many different areas of my life and kind of dreaming about what this book would become. I thought, man, is that not us in our waiting, right? Like we would love to just escape chill hours altogether. We would love to just say like, Lord, I want the fruit in my life. I want the thing that I'm longing for, but not at the expense of me having to wait, not at the expense of it feeling like a winter season. But so many times, I would argue every time in my life I've had to wait or I've had to long for something and trust in God and rely on Him fully, it has actually been the thing that has molded and crafted and shaped me and readied me for whatever God had next. And so, yeah, I think that olive tree has kind of helped
Yeah.
shape the way I view waiting a little bit.
Yeah. And is it still growing now?
Well, we don't live there anymore.
Oh,
So
that's right.
and it was a rental house. So I hope that the woman that lives there now is still enjoying our olive tree.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Little legacy back in Mississippi.
Yes, I know. I know.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's such a good analogy. And yeah, nobody wants to go through the winters, but it's actually it's where we get strongest, and it's
Yeah,
where we
totally.
are prepared for that harvest. Yeah. So
Yeah.
good. All right. Well, for the overachievers listening,
Mm.
in your chapter Weakness and Strength, which, just the title of the chapter alone, I was like, oh, this is going to get me. I already know this one's going to
Yeah.
get me. When I am weak, that is when He is strong. And I'm like, that is like, I have to read that like on a daily basis. Like, Lord, make me okay with being weak and surrendering and putting it all aside. And so I'm prayerful I'm not the only one listening that, has to do that on a regular
Totally.
basis. this. And so I'd love for you to kind of share that conversation that you talked about with your mom, where you just had gotten to this point of just complete overwhelm. Situations were just so much beyond what you could fix, figure out, manage, whatever. And just that, I don't want to call it a cliche, but for me, it's one of those, like, we have to control the controllables. And I'm like, oh, not that again. Like I just would rather control all of it, not just the, like, well, let's define controllables,
Yeah, that's right.
So
Totally.
yeah, dig into that for us, because that's going to be for hopefully not just me.
Yeah, I would love to. This is more of a vocational change example that my husband and I were walking through a couple years ago. We were considering a move to a new church, which spoiler alert, God did actually move us back up to East Tennessee, and so that's kind of how the story played out. But we were in the middle of trying to find a home up here in an insane real estate market in the middle of 2022. We were first time home buyers, so like we'd not done any of that before. There was the emotion and just concern and all of that of leaving our first church. Like it was his first lead pastorate, and we were considering this first kind of transition as a couple. Because when I married him, he was pastoring there, and so we'd never done that before. So there was a lot that we'd not finished well, like a chapter of life together yet. So that was a first. So there was so much, Ashlee, and I just remember like we'd gotten pre-approved for our mortgage, and we'd like jumped through all the hoops, but like bought something sight unseen, just like such blind faith. But we felt and sensed it was what God was calling us to do. And I remember calling my mom one day and I just lost it. Like there was just so much. There's only so much I could do to like get to the finish line of the decision. And it was just a lot. And like we're in a Southern Baptist church. And so like in order to close on our house, like Dustin came up and like preached one Sunday morning, and they did a church vote and all that. And all that had to be wrapped up before we could close on the house. Like it was just, I'm telling you more than you need to know, but it was just a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of relaying all of this to my mom. And one of her famous lines, when I call her and I'm in this kind of place, she'll go, "So do you want advice or do you just want me to listen?"
Yeah. So wise. It's such a great question.
Yeah, which is such a kind question to ask. And so she asked me that, and we kind of laughed. And she finally just said, "Rebecca, there is only so much you can do. Like you are a fixer, you are an achiever, you are a doer. And God wired you that way," which for most of my life, I have almost resented that was my wiring. And I've learned to lean into that, but not overextend it, right? Which is its own challenge. But she said the reason you're feeling this way right now is because there is so much of this that you have absolutely zero control over today. So she just asked me, like, what can you realistically do today? What is your next step? And that kind of forced me to zero in on like, well, I can't worry about X, Y, or Z today, but I can do this. And I just continued doing that again and again. And the gap between where my control ended and where only God could provide was just this opportunity to continue to depend on him and continue to surrender that to him, which was a daily, hourly, minute by minute process during that season of life. And I think sometimes we just bump up against that kind of level of stress. And that advice was so helpful to me. And just again and again, I would go like, okay, what do I have control over? And what do I just need to give to God today?
Yeah. And I totally relate with that. So when my husband and I first bought our first house, this was, almost 20 years ago now. And we're almost like in the similar situation. We were moving up from Daytona Beach. We bought the house in Georgia, sight unseen, and in an area that we had no idea what we were doing. We had no friends to go check it out for us. We knew we needed to be close to where his first job out of college was going to be. And so we didn't understand Atlanta traffic. We didn't understand so many, just first time home buyers. Yeah. You're just like, I don't know. I need this many bedrooms and this many bathrooms, and what else matters? I don't know.
Yeah.
And we joke now that so many of our life together has been like everything happens all at once. And so like we had graduated, we got married, we moved to Georgia, we bought our first house in 30 days. Years later, we had, 3 kids in 3 years. And then the next, we started a company, had the 3 babies in 3 years, and moved, I think 2 times, Yeah. And so it's like everything you said, it's interesting because a lot of times we feel like we bump up into these, you use the words like bump into these situations where, everything seems to be happening all at once.
Yes.
I feel like that's my life. I
Yeah.
where it's like, I totally resonate when you said, daily, hourly, minute by minute of what's the next best thing I can do. I can't remember the scripture for it, but there's something in Psalms where it's literally like the next best thing, and not the next 100 best things, but
which is so hard when you are built like you and I. Like, we're new friends, but I can tell that just from what you shared about your husband and your dynamic, and it feels very similar to ours.
Yeah.
Like, we run at one speed and it's fast.
Yeah. Try to keep up.
We make decisions fast.
Yes.
We move fast. And I'm grateful that we're both wired that way. I think sometimes like the opposite attract thing is totally at play, and that could be a gift in its own right. But I'm grateful that my husband and I both like run in the same direction and run at the same pace. And I think the challenge of that is just running ahead of the Lord so many times, right? And being willing to sit in that place of dependence when so much is out of our control. And I think sometimes that is like a sobering reminder that, oh, I am actually not the infinite one. That is God. I'm very finite, very limited in capacity. And so God, I'm asking that you would do what only you can do. I think that is a blessing and a curse of our types of personalities.
Yes, it is. And what's so great though is I was just talking about this with another friend where it's those moments that we now have a track record of him showing up when we finally, I don't know why it keeps taking me so long to get to the point where you're like, I've done everything I can do. And I've, not that there's not prayer and trusting along the way, but there's been some really stark moments in our businesses and, family stuff. We adopted our daughter. So that was a whole just faith journey. I mean, there's just so many parts of the story where, this point that you brought up just really resonated with me, because I'm like, it's in the moments where we do say, when I am weak, you are strong. And I can't wait for you to show off. I'm so sorry. It took me a minute to remember it's your turn to show off. And you've got this great plan that is so much better than I could have.
Amen.
And there's just so many moments where we can look back now and say, I mean, literally like last week, like we had a conversation one night and we're like, we literally can't do anything else about this situation. And the next morning it was like, calls me at like 9 a.m. Babe, you're not going to guess what just happened. And I'm like, of course, and of course. It's just, it's so good. And I just kind of picture God up there, like such a loving, gentle father, just like, I told you, I had it this whole time. You could have slept so much better last night.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
But we're getting there. Yeah.
Our sleep is, at the end of the day, an act of faith, right? Like, it's such a good reminder of like, man, anything I'm ruminating on to the extent that like I'm not sleeping at night, the King of the universe holds my whole life in his hands. And I lie in bed awake over like most silly temporal things. Yeah. It's
just a good reminder. We can say it all day, and we should. So
yeah, that's right.
All right. Well, this kind of leads into my next question too, where at one point you say, you love learning only if you learn it quickly the first time.
Oh. Yeah, you're
so
gonna bring that.
Here's our personality showing up again, where I'm like, oh, she's calling me out. Like we should definitely be hanging out more.
Totally.
So just talk about the dangers of using these past experiences as gauges for like how it's going to turn out this time, and being willing to just try again, and being willing to fail, and knowing that that's just part of the process.
Yeah. So I kind of couched this whole thought in a story when I took pottery classes, which you'll remember from reading the book. And I went to this pottery class. I had never sat down next to a pottery wheel in my whole 33 years of life, Ashlee. Yeah. And I went with a friend of mine, and I was so excited because it was something I had always wanted to learn. And I consider myself to be pretty crafty. I knit, I crochet, I make polymer clay jewelry. It's just in me. It's in my mom. It's in my grandfather. Like I love that. Come from a long line of creative people. And so anytime I try something like that, I wrongfully initially many times we'll just assume like, oh, I'll try it and it'll be easy. I'll
Yeah.
catch on. It'll be
Yeah.
fine. And so the goal was to make at least a couple like a bowl was the goal.
Yeah.
And I kept like my clay kept like popping off the wheel. I could not get like the technique down at all. And I spent the whole class, Ashley, just so frustrated with myself. So the metaphor is like I totally missed the experience because I was unwilling to be a beginner. I hate being a beginner or an amateur, right? Like we just in our society, our hurry up world, like we just want to become good, proficient, a leader at something fast. And sometimes it is the slowing down, the being willing to be coachable, the just willingness to try again that keeps us in the game. But that particular day, I just remember leaving thinking like, man, I want to do that again and like really listen. I want to really listen to the instructor. I want to watch her technique. I want to just savor that in a way that I didn't this time because I just wanted to go in and throw a bowl and be good at it. And I wasn't. And so I think that's such a good lesson for us in our resiliency of being an amateur. You know, I mean, you think about writing or any of the work that we do or in business, there's so many applications of this where we just want it fast. And that is not always the pace that we need to go at. And so I was really challenged by that and still am in many areas of my life and career. So I think we have to have a willingness to be a beginner sometimes.
What would you think, you know, why do you think it is that we just want to be so good the first time?
Yeah.
You know,
I think it's our culture. I think it's in us to live a highlight reel. Like we all day long see other people's highlight reels and then expect, you know, to be proficient at something fast. I also think there's just so many shortcuts to life these days. And I think that does nothing but train our brains to want it in other areas of our lives. Like if we have an early flight, we don't inconvenience a friend, we take an Uber. If we're sick and we want our favorite soup, a friend doesn't bring it to us, we order it from Panera. Like, and every rep at that just causes us to want a faster and faster life. And that I believe applies to the parts of us that are learning something new.
Yeah. And I think failing publicly is like, you know, for a lot of people, I think for me, for sure. I mean, you're like, sure, I'll fail. I'll learn privately over here where nobody could potentially see what's happening, you know.
Yeah.
I won't show up until I feel like it's perfect, or, you know, the whole perfectionism lie, you know, shows up where don't actually try it for real until it's just right, you know.
Yeah.
And just the pressure. I always say, like, if we could all like the whole world collectively one day say, hey, we're all gonna be trying something new today. Like, all the grace, all that, like, if we could just collectively announce, like, today's the day to try something new. Everybody's gonna be failing. No, you know, don't judge. I don't know why that feels like it would bring so much peace. And I guess that's just maybe a personal struggle of not wanting to fail publicly or fail, you know, where you could be judged or whatever. And I love how you said, you know, just letting go of that cultural expectation and just knowing that God is calling us to something new. I was just, you know, when I interviewed Mary Morantz, you know, a couple weeks ago, and we wrapped up with her, you know, literally talking like it is okay to become something new, you know, like you were created to be something new, you know, and the full freedom in doing that. And my funny example in comparison to your pottery wheel, I've never done a pottery wheel either. And when you're explaining how it literally flew off and almost hit somebody, I'm like, my only experience with a pottery wheel is like, what was the movie?
Leave it to me.
What was the movie? Was it, I want to say Ghost. What was that movie?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, this is bad. Anyway, you should never try to quote things on a whim.
I know.
But anyway, I have no experience with a pottery wheel. And so when you were explaining that, I'm like, oh, this is like a dangerous, like you really do want to try to do it.
It's a whole thing, actually. I had no clue. I just, and we read scripture and we sing songs that like talk about like the potter and the clay. Like I just had this like, I don't know, dreamy perspective of what it was going to be like to do pottery. And it was like a whole thing. It was a whole thing.
Yeah.
And so, but doesn't that apply too? Of like, we can look at somebody else's story, maybe even in a writing sense, like, and apply this to your own area of business or wherever you're at. But I can remember, the decade I was longing to write books and wondering how God would write that story or how he would provide. And I would look at friends get book deals or take that next step. And I had no clue what was involved and the time it would take and the blessing it has been. I'm so grateful. And the actual journey toward the thing we're longing for almost always is going to look different than we think. And will probably be filled with challenges and seeming delays and all of those things that are great teachers if we allow them to be.
Yeah, for sure. Well, my husband and I tried to play racquetball back in college when we were just dating. And similar to your crafty, creative giftings, I really could show up and play any sport. And I really was pretty athletic naturally. And so I'm like, racquetball, like this, I played tennis, like this will be fine. I was terrible. And we got in our very first, like, not fight, because you can't really fight with my husband if you know him. And it was very one-sided. And to this day, we still have a rule. We've been married for 21 years and we still will never play racquetball again. And I'm like, you know what? After reading your chapter, I'm like, I'm going to play racquetball.
Try it again.
I'm going to do it. And I'm going to enjoy it bouncing off the back wall. And I can't tell where it's going to go. I'm just going to be like, Rebecca would be so proud.
For you. Send me a picture. I love it.
Right? Oh man. All right. Final question. And this was just so good for my soul. When you were talking about, redirecting and, rejection versus redirection, I think is how you call it. And you say closed doors are a gift of clarity from God. And I love that. And I recently had posted something about how open doors are so fun. They're exciting. You can't wait to like turn the knob and open this, we'll walk through this open door. And closed doors sometimes get this like bad rep of, oh, it's a closed door. It's, it's a no or whatever. And so the way you phrase it's a gift of clarity. And I'd love for you to just kind of maybe bring us home on this topic.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, rejection is something I couldn't leave out of this message of longing because it is part of it. Like if it's a vocational longing that you're navigating, I'll stick with writing a book as an example. You better get real comfortable with rejection if you want to be an author. And so many times, even when we were pitching to get my first book contract, I remember writing every publisher's name on a sticky note on this little matted board I had in my office. And every time somebody would say no, I would X through the publisher's name and I would name by name pray for, if I had a name of an editor, I would pray for them and that the message would land on the right desk at the right time and just trusting God in that. But every time it was like the removal of the sticky note stung. Sure. And it was a very clear, like, okay, Lord, this was not who I was supposed to partner with for this. And that is an answered prayer. Right? Whether we choose to see it that way or not, God is giving us clarity when we have a no. As I'm specifically thinking in like a business or vocational sense. And if we begin to train our hearts to see that as a redirection from the Lord, it's actually a lot easier to stomach because if I truly believe God has called me to this work of becoming an author, I'll put myself back in that seat a couple years ago. If I sense, yes, you've given me this message and I want to be faithful to that, then I also have to believe he has a path forward for that.
Right.
And so the no makes the path just that much clearer. Right. And so then I know how to pray. Like yesterday, I still thought that was an open door. So thank you, God, for the gift of clarity that is not your chosen path for me. So now I'm going to focus here until you make the next step, forward really clear for me. And so I think, again, that's an area that will feel real countercultural. Like rejection's hard. I won't deny that. But when we view it in that way and continue to have reps where we choose to think about it as a redirection, I don't know. I just think it's made it a lot easier for me personally. Yeah.
And I totally agree. I mean, Andy and I, we pray for no's just as much as we pray for yeses. Closed doors and open doors. Like either one, we just need to know, where are we going tomorrow, today. So I love that. It was just the way you wrote it. I was just like, that's just beautiful. It just resonated so well. Well, I know everybody is going to be ordering your book if they have not already. If you have not, again, it's called You're Not Too Late by Rebecca George. And tell us all the the ways we can order the book, how we can find you, follow you, find
Yeah.
all your resources?
Totally. So I'm the most active over on Instagram. My handle is Rebecca Georgia Author. I'm a CCA Rebecca, so that makes it easy. You can grab the book anywhere you like to buy books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Christian book. I also have a podcast called Radical Radiance,
Yes.
where we release episodes every week that just talk about what it looks like to radiate the heart of Jesus and all that we do. And Camp for Creatives. Yeah, we've got a lot of creative people around here. So if that is something that would be interesting to you or valuable to you this year, we have another offering in September. So
Amazing.
info on that is on my website.
Love that. Well, thank you so, so much for being here, especially during this busy, full season of launching your book and just spreading the message. It's been so good. I really appreciate you. It's been great getting to know you. And yeah, thank you again for
Same
being
here,
here.
Ashlee. Oh, I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again here for the Big Ideas podcast. Keep those big ideas coming, and we will see you on the next episode. Thanks again. Hey, friends. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Before you go, it would mean the world to me and my family if you would share this episode with at least one person who you think might benefit from this message. And of course, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. You can also follow me at Ashlee Ilg on Instagram to keep up with our adventures and for continued encouragement as you pursue your big ideas. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time.